Our workshop this morning, Sketchbox by Slipstream, is sponsored by Xcel Energy and also supported by KEEP, the Wisconsin K-12 Energy Education Program, and by Slipstream, the developer of Sketchbox, and also by the Create Energy Center. We're fortunate to have partners from Slipstream here today, and we'll hear more from them later in our presentation. And we'll also take a look at resources from CREATE, the Center for Renewable Energy Advanced Technology Education. Sketchbox is an energy modeling interface. And what we're hoping to do is introduce it today so that those of you that are not familiar with it so far have a sense of how to use it and what it can do. We'd like to motivate the use of energy modeling in the classroom, including career connections that can be made. We'll describe the available lesson materials and resources that will help support that work. And then we will demonstrate the creation of several building models using the tool. One reason that we might be interested in this is that buildings just use a tremendous amount of energy. So in 2021, the U.S. Energy Information Administration reported that buildings accounted for almost 40% of the energy used in the U.S. And so there are lots of ways to think about working with a building for it to use less energy, for example, upgrading lighting, changing scheduling and temperature set points, updating mechanical systems to units that are more efficient, making improvements to the building envelope. But how do you know if that's really working? And so energy modeling helps us make decisions about what strategies are likely to provide the greatest return on investment. The U.S. Department of Energy provides software, simulation software for this purpose. It's called DOE2, often referred to as DOE2. This is an energy use and cost analysis software. And DOE2 can be a little bit cumbersome and tricky to use. If any of you, especially if any of you have used it, you might know a little bit about this. So the DOE provides eQuest as a user interface, which can still be a little bit cumbersome and difficult to use. And you have to download and install it, and there's a bit of a learning curve. And so what Slipstream has done is develop this platform, Sketchbox. And it wasn't perhaps initially designed as a teaching tool, but it can be a great teaching tool. It's an online user interface to DOE2. And so there's no download required. Slipstream is providing it free of charge to educational institutions. And because there's no download required, you can use it on a student Chromebook and from any location. And so there are a lot of advantages to using this in the classroom or in places where you don't have access to sort of fixed computing resources. So in this, using this interface, students can change the parameters of a building to explore the impact on energy utilization and cost. So for example, you can choose industry norms across many different building types. So for example, a school building might be built very differently than a commercial office building or a retail building or a library or a fitness center or a hospital. And so you can get very quickly pre-formatted industry averages and sort of starting values in those sectors. You can change the city and state location. And that becomes really important because DOE2, which is running behind Sketchbox, is tied to weather data for many cities across the country. And so weather data has an enormous impact on the way in which buildings use energy. And so the fact that we can change different locations becomes very, very important. You can change other factors, such as the aspect ratio, the sort of length to width ratio of a building, the amount of window area that's on the face of the building, and even the spatial orientation of the building, which side of the building is facing, south, for example. And there's even an option to change energy codes, which change from state to state and municipality to municipality. And you can change those and understand the impact that they have. That actually is a tool that I think is a really important tool for classrooms in terms of connecting local policy decisions with the way that energy is utilized in buildings. So in Sketchbox, what we're able to do is navigate to different tools using 6 tabs. Those tabs are the Project, Design, Schedules, Baseline, Measures, and Results tabs. And there's preloaded sample data in each of those tabs that you can use for a quick start. including some of the things that I mentioned before, building size, mechanical system, building type. There's even preloaded data for utility rates for electricity and natural gas, depending upon the location. And so in just a moment, I'm actually going to open Sketchbox and share my screen as we model a building. I'll navigate through several of the tabs. We're going to take a 150,000 square foot school building in Chicago, Illinois. We'll do a quick model of that building. We'll do it in a matter of minutes. And additionally, excuse me. And then after we have a chance to see some baseline data, we'll come back and make some predictions about what would happen if we made various changes to that building. Sorry, what I meant to say before is that 150,000 square foot building is sort of a large middle school or maybe a small to medium sized high school. So that's sort of just as a baseline to understand what we'll be modeling. So if you were going to start using Sketchbox, what you would do is navigate to a link that's on the Slipstream webpage. The exact link is right here. I'll place it in the chat later when we ask all of you to take a look at Sketchbox. On that page, there's a large purple button that looks just like the picture that I've posted here, which says Start Using Sketchbox Today. And it'll take you to a login page where you're just asked for your email and a password. If you've not logged in ever before, then you will create an account. And if you need help with your login or your account, there's an email address down here that you can use for that function. I'll point out that this is not an email address really for technical support. There are several other ways to do that, and I'll talk about those a little bit later in the workshop. So that's a quick overview of how you would get started with Sketchbox. And so now I'm going to show you what it looks like once you log in. So I'll stop sharing here. I'll switch over to a live Sketchbox screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so what I'm sharing right now, everyone, is the essentially login page after you've logged into Sketchbox. And you'll notice across the top there are 6 tabs. And actually, there we are. So we have 6 tabs. And the tab that I'm looking at right now is the project tab. And so, for example, I can give this project a name. I'm just going to call this right now Chicago School. I won't make changes to a few of these things. The country here is listed as the United States. I don't have an option to change that. We'll talk more about that perhaps later. The state is Chicago, Illinois. We're going to leave that the same. But though I could change to any state in the US and then several cities within each state. Below that, there is an energy code listed, IECC 2018. There are about 10 options for different energy codes. We actually have a lesson that's already built that helps students explore what an energy code is and the impact of changing to different codes. And then there's a compliance path which is related to the energy code. We won't talk more about that right now as we're just getting started. You'll notice next to that there is a financial category. And so this tells us that we're in the commercial rate category right now, and that we have a cost of electricity and a cost of natural gas for that rate category in this location. And so that's really all that I want to look at on this tab. We will talk a little bit about the emissions information later. This emissions data is specific to this location and the way that electricity is produced in this location. So I'll say more about that later. But for right now, we actually won't change anything on this front page to start with on the project tab, but we have an understanding at least of what's there. So now I'll switch over to the design tab, and you can see that here is a sample building. I can kind of move this building around a little bit to take a look at the various faces of the building, and you can see it's attached to a compass rose, so we know what the orientation is. Right now, we have a medium office building that is 50,000 square feet. Those aren't the necessarily parameters that I wanted to look at. We're mostly working with students. Let's look at a school building. And so I simply grab this drop-down menu, and I'll choose to switch to a school or university building. and it automatically populated with this 150,000 square feet. So I chose that in my instructions just because that was the default value. It's given us 2 floors and a floor height of 13 feet and a few other pieces of building characteristics. And so we have a perimeter zone depth, the modeling zone, thermal zone for around the outside of the building. It gives us something about the insulation on the roof, something about the type of wall. Here we have glazing type. Students may not understand that glazing refers to windows. We need to let them know that. It says fixed fenestration, which means we have windows that cannot be opened. And then below that, we see the percentage of each wall face that is windows. You can change that individually by wall face, which can be really valuable based on a building, especially if you're trying to work with smart solar design. Below that, we have some more information about skylights and heating and cooling systems, and even hot water, which is labeled here DHW, which stands for domestic hot water. So those are all different options on the design tab. I won't change any other right now other than just to change to school or university type. And then we're going to jump immediately across these other 3 tabs, which we'll get back to later. We're just going to look at some results. So I'm going to let this run. And you'll get a sense of actually how quickly it runs. It doesn't run instantaneously, but my experience is that most models run within 1 to 2 minutes. And so it looks like this one is already just about to be completed. I apologize. I normally increase the view size of the screen, but for some reason I'm not able to do that. At least, actually, no, I am. Never mind. I'm sorry. It wasn't working before, but here we are. So what we're looking at on the results page is a graph that gives us a detailed overview of the way in which our sample building uses energy over the course of a year. And so the scale on the left is in dollars per year. And every one of these colored rectangles gives us an example of how energy is being used in the building. And so, for example, the baseline, our baseline model that we have here costs a little bit over $15,000 per year to cool during the cooling season. Right below that, we have heating expense, which is just under $18,000. And so on and so forth, all the way down. You'll notice this large orange section here is interior lighting, almost $30,000 for lighting, not uncommon for this type of building. And then below that, we have additional equipment inside of the building, many other types of equipment using electricity. So that is our that's an overview of the way that you can model the building very quickly, the type of results that it can provide for you. I'll point out something which is really kind of incredible here. Right now, we're looking at energy cost, but we can change that graphic to actually give us carbon dioxide emissions in terms of CO2 equivalents per year, electricity consumption, kilowatt hours per year, natural gas consumption in therms per year, site energy or source energy. And so that data display is actually flexible and has a lot more information than just starting with energy costs. Below that, you'll see actually a similar breakdown, but not the annual values, the year by year. And so I can say, boy, if I want to know which month had the highest cooling cost, in this case, that's July, what was the cooling cost? I can say we spent a little over $4,000 to cool this school building in July. And so we can break down even that far, all of those same categories, but on a monthly basis. And then below that, we actually have a numerical table, which gives us information, access to some other information, for example, such as peak electric demand and the total annual electric consumption here in a tabular form. There's even a little clipboard icon. You can cut and paste this entire data table into Microsoft Excel or into Google Sheets, for example. And I've sometimes made a shared spreadsheet and had students model various buildings and just cut their summary results into one table. So we can do really quick analysis in that way. I have not been, okay, thank you. Samara reminded us if you have questions that you can drop those in the chat. But here's the quick overview of the results tab for this building. So I'm going to stop sharing at this moment. I'm going to go back to our slideshow for just a second. And let me jump right back there. Okay, and so in the slides that we'll try to post for this meeting, you'll see there are just some screenshots that help to show some of these tabs that we were just looking at. So the project tab, the design tab, and then a few sample graphs if you wish to look back at those later. Here's the annual summary that we were just looking at. And so now I'm going to pause and actually ask a question for everyone. So we've just had a chance to, in fact, let me go back one slide just for a moment. I'm sorry, let me actually view this as well. And so here's the information that we were just looking at. This building has an annual electric consumption of over 1 million kilowatt hours of electricity. So that's going to cost well over, that by itself will cost well over $100,000, or around $100,000. We have an annual natural gas consumption at a different energy unit in the therm, but just under 35,000 therms of natural gas and a total cost of just under $117,000. So I would like to ask you to consider what would happen to the electricity use, the natural gas use, and the cost of operating, energy cost of operating this building if we moved it to, if we cut the size of the building in half, if the original building had twice as much window surface area. Right now, every wall has 22% window area. What if we went to 44? And what happens if the original building instead moved to Los Angeles from Chicago? So I'm making only one of those changes at a time, but what would happen? Would those cause the electricity use to increase or decrease or stay the same? What would happen to the natural gas use? What would happen to the cost? And so I've put each of those questions into a short form. I believe Samara is going to, or may have already posted it in the chat. And I'd encourage you to take a minute or two just to think about that. You don't need to remember the questions. They're written into the form as well. So let's take about 2 minutes so you can make some predictions. And then we'll take a look at your predictions. And then we'll compare that to the results that the model created. So I'll stop sharing right here. Samara, thank you for posting that link in the chat. And yes, that's right. Thank you. And that's exactly right. Every one of those changes is made just one at a time. And then whatever change was made changes back before the next modification is created. We're keeping we're changing one variable at a time and controlling all the rest of the variables in our simulation. Okay, I think we're ready to take a quick look at our results. It looks like almost everyone is into the survey. And so we have a few predictions. And so the first prediction, what happens if we take the building from 150,000 square feet and reduce it to 75,000 square feet? Most of our participants have predicted the energy use will be reduced, but not to half
Could you
as.
enlarge your screen just a bit? It's hard for us to see.
Yeah. Oh, there. For some reason, it didn't work before, but I tried and it didn't. Here we go. Thank you. Yeah. So the green that we see here is the energy use is reduced, but not quite half as much. And the orange is the energy use is less than half as much. And so we have a few opinions there. Here we have the window area. What if that is doubled on all sides? We have actually unanimous agreement that that's going to increase the energy. That blue segment is actually from a test run of our survey before. So we think that more windows will increase the energy. Let's find out. If we change the building from Chicago to Los Angeles, we think the overall energy use will decrease. And so we'll explore that in just a moment. What happens if we move to Los Angeles? All of us are expecting the energy cost to increase. And then if we move from Chicago to Los Angeles, what happens to the carbon footprint? And so most feel the carbon footprint will decrease, but we have a few other options as well. So let's actually take a look at the results. Let's see what the model says for us. And so let me bring that back up. And so here are the results when I ran this 2 or 3 days ago. And let me get back into view mode. And so what you're seeing on the top, the baseline, that is our 150,000 square foot school building in Chicago, Illinois, with no changes. And so if we take the building and cut the area in half, what we'll notice is that the electricity use actually does cut almost exactly in half by the prediction of this model, but the natural gas is still significantly more than half. And so we could talk quite a bit about heat transfer and surface area to volume ratio with students if you wanted to, but you can see we can very quickly make some good modeling decisions about what happens when we change the size of a building. The cost also was very close to cutting in half, but a little bit more. And so one place that we could start with student exploration of building models like this. Now, doubling the window area, we had sort of a uniform expectation that would increase the energy requirements. It turns out that was correct. And so, but not by an enormous amount. You can see from the baseline, electricity use increased from about 1,027 megawatt hours to 1,064. Natural gas from just under 35,000 therms to just over 35,000 therms, and the cost did increase about $3,000. And so this one actually is in some ways near and dear to my heart. I've seen multiple groups of students when I've used this with my own classes really argue about the impact of windows. Students saying things like, because you have more window area, you'll need less energy for lighting, and the lights use a lot of energy. And then students also saying, in the winter, when I'm sitting close to the window, it feels cold. And I bet that's a problem for losing energy through the windows. And so a lot of debate about really what do windows actually do, and some interesting things you can explore even by changing the location of those windows. For example, putting many on the south face of the building and very few on the north. And then we moved to Los Angeles, and we expected that the electricity might increase. It turned out that was true because we need more electricity to do more cooling. We thought the overall energy might decrease. That was also true. We need far less heating. You can see less than a third of the natural gas for heating that we use in Chicago. And then there was a prediction that the energy cost would increase. And that is absolutely true because the price of electricity is more in California than it is in Chicago. And so you can see you can very quickly model and answer the types of questions that we've posed here. So we are pretty close to on track with our slide presentation. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed actually one. There's one that I wanted to add one more slide. Sorry about that. So I also looked at the carbon impact of moving to California. And so in California, we ended up using a little bit more electricity and a lot less natural gas. And built into Sketchbox are emissions rates for electricity and natural gas. And so, for example, in Chicago, every kilowatt hour of electricity produced has a carbon equivalent attached to it, 0.371. The same for California. But the natural gas is the same. If we're burning natural gas, we're burning natural gas, no matter where we burn it. And so what we see is that this building, which uses less energy in Los Angeles, also produces a lot less carbon. And so over 20% less carbon, actually. The summary statistics are here at the bottom of this slide. And so if part of your class is to be interested in carbon emissions, then that's also something that you can focus on in a number of different ways using Sketchbox.
I'm going to try to keep this relatively brief on my end. I get really excited about this because of the success I've had with my students in my classroom. And so I wanted to talk about a couple things as an educator. So one of the things I want to start out with just right away is, the big question is, am I going to take the time to learn this and teach this to students in my classroom? And to be honest with you, I think, from what you've seen already with the power of this tool, and some of the things we're going to talk about as we continue to go forward, I think you're going to really have a lot to talk about with other teachers once you get back into school this fall And I think this is just an unbelievable tool for you to mix a whole bunch of things in with. So let's start out with this. Number one, in your classroom and in your curriculum, and then just in common sense, kind of an enhancement tool for your classroom. So whether you're integrating it into curriculum, whether I know we have someone who's teaching architecture and construction in here, whether you want students to have a better common sense understanding of how a building operates, this tool has so many facets to it that you can really integrate it into science, math, ELA, CTE. The options are really limitless. So I'm going to talk just a bit about this right now. So first of all, this tool really lets you understand resources. We just talked about carbon dioxide and the carbon footprint, understanding the resources in terms of electricity being used, talking about things like BTUs and therms and kilowatt hours and megawatt hours. This is such an integrative hands-on tool that it kind of allows a student to almost teach themselves. Just the way it kind of walks you through and the ability for you to analyze data. So I talked about different things with analyzing data. And when we look at analyzing data, I think, no matter what field you go into, at some point, either you as a business owner, or you working for someone, or you being a maintenance person for an educational facility, you have to analyze costs and kind of benefits, your pros and cons. If we add an addition onto our school, how much is that going to cost us in the next year? Those are a lot of things that students don't understand until they actually end up getting into industry. And this is a great opportunity to give them a leg up. So it allows you to kind of understand how to analyze costs, analyze building size, and kind of the benefits to those different approaches. Gives a great opportunity for students to look at some real life examples for climate change and then solutions. We know if we're going to keep the sustainability of our buildings kind of at the forefront of our minds, we have to be teaching our students this at a young age. And this is a great opportunity for a student to figure out, hey, how much carbon does my building really produce? What is my footprint? Very difficult to show this kind of on a paper with pencil. This tool is it's just so powerful, and it's so almost instantaneous that the feedback for your students and for you as a teacher, it's just phenomenal. Next, talking about different career opportunities, specialization, and advancement possibilities. As someone who came from industry before I was a teacher, we know that careers are becoming more specialized every day. And we know some of these careers that weren't always on the forefront before are really on the forefront now, including renewable energy. I even have architecture listed in here. We talked this morning, 2 different people introduced themselves as energy engineers. These are very real, I'll use the word lucrative, high demand careers. So whether you're a building manager, an engineer, going into architecture, HVAC is huge right now. Whether you're going to analyze data for buildings, mentioning construction and being a contract here, or even someone who coordinates sustainability within buildings, this tool just really gives students a launching point or a jumping springboard into what all those things mean. So let me go to the next slide here. All right, now, as a teacher, I know that I have standards to meet in my classroom. This tool is really easy to integrate a lot of those standards into, and I'm going to talk real quick about that. So when we talk about meeting standards, I feel like one of the most important things for students is that we allow them to meet standards in a relatable way. Again, with the real life scenario and integration of this tool, those are really easy to do. So first bullet point here, mathematics, area, volume, percent change, having students calculate all those things and changing those variables. Those are all really great hands-on ways to take a simple standard like, hey, find the volume of this, to, hey, if we have the volume of this, what does that do to our energy cost? And then if we change it from, as Jim mentioned earlier, from Chicago to LA, what's our percent change in electricity use? What's our percent change in BTUs? Things like that. And so it's just a really great opportunity to integrate standards into your classroom. I know we have a CTE teacher on here, so insulation values, R values, material costs, marketing and managing. If you're gonna build a building for somebody as a general contractor, or you're gonna subcontract this work out, this is a great tool for students to have conversations with homeowners and say, hey, ma'am, I know you want this size of a building. I want you to know roughly what your energy costs will be. If you want to upgrade to LED lighting, That's a little bit more expensive, but let's take a look using this modeling tool at how much that will save you in the long run. It's just really hard to have those conversations and integrate that into your classroom without a tool such as this. And again, I wouldn't be here kind of professing the usage of this tool if I hadn't already done it in my classroom. And the ease and the relatability in which this tool kind of provides is just, in my opinion, it's just second to none because it's so easy to use. I am a middle school science teacher right now. I just came from high school, but I even pulled up some middle school science standards from NGSS. And so talking about matter and its interactions, here we're looking at temperature and we're talking about change in motion. Well, that's a great opportunity to talk about insulation. Engineering and design, we can easily meet that standard within this tool as well. And so if you're a teacher and you're wondering about how can I really integrate this into my classroom when my principal wants to know, hey, how does this software help us meet standards? It's just really easy. All right, and so one of the things I love about this tool, and I will say that it's really allowed me to do this, is expand my knowledge and the possibilities within my classroom. So there is a measure, or there is a change you can make to your building in Sketchbox called SHGC, which is the solar heat gain coefficient. I'm going to be honest with you, before I started using this tool, I had no idea what that meant. Quick Google search allowed me to look that up. So now I can explore with my students solar, right? I can explore mathematically, what is a coefficient? I can talk about values. And so the solar heat gain coefficient is essentially, how much heat is going to be entered into your building, and do you want that? Do you want that type of glazing on your windows? What's the cost of those windows? Does it matter if I put those windows in Chicago or LA or Dallas, Texas? Where are they the most useful? Are those windows the best bang for my buck? Is it more important for me to upgrade my windows, or is it more important for me to upgrade my LED lighting? And what would be the percent change for each time? So, there are so many little tools in here that allow you to not only gain your own knowledge, but allow students to gain their knowledge. And what I love about that knowledge that you gain is you can apply it instantly, run your model, and you can take your data out right away. And so I'm really happy with what this tool has done for me in my classroom. I'm really happy what it's done for my students. And I really want to emphasize how easy it is to use this tool. And I'm sure Jim will talk about that in a little bit with, running it on different programs and stuff, or different hardware platforms. But anyway, that's what I have for right now. And so I will turn it back over to you, Jim.
Joe did a great job of talking about how thematically this fits into many different classes and how it aligns with educational standards. In Wisconsin, we have even more ways to think about how you might use this. There is a relatively new energy pathway that's created by the Department of Public Instruction, and Samara is going to say a few things about that in just a moment. We've also seen in Wisconsin and across the country tremendous job growth in renewable energy. And one of the resources that's really valuable for working with students here is the Green Buildings Career Map. And so I'm going to show just very briefly what that looks like. This career map is really pretty fascinating. The way that it works is that there's a matrix that's set up that I think you'll be able to see on the screen right now. The bottom of the matrix are entry-level careers. The top are mid-level and advanced careers. And across the bottom axis, we have different industry sectors. So architecture, engineering, and other professional services, building operations, commercial and institutional construction and retrofitting, and then residential and multifamily construction and retrofitting. And every one of the circles that you see in this grid is a different career. And so if, for example, I go into building operations and facility management and I click the circle that's right here, I find out that this is a building automation systems technician. And I get a call-out box that has a brief description. That call-out box is probably a little bit hard to read. I can zoom in on it a little bit. That call-out box has a job detail that I can click to get more information about that particular career. And then also you can see from that circle, it maps out to 4 or 5 other circles. Those are career advancement pathways. And so there's a tremendous amount of information available about many different careers here. And so these can be really valuable resources for students to access.
The Wisconsin Energy Career Pathway Map, which is a template for all the regions around Wisconsin. And Jim, if you could just pop over to the next slide, please. So the career maps are divided into 2 tracks, energy generation and conservation, and energy transmission, distribution, and storage. So there's kind of two different facets of energy. And then the career map is then divided, and you can see that in the column on the left there, by educational level. That would be the minimum education level that would be needed to go into some of the suggested job titles that are seen in the energy career pathway. So allowing students who maybe have just finished high school or have a GED diploma, all the way through master's and beyond, the different career titles there. And that actually blends and meshes really well with the career map that Jim was just sharing as well, where students can explore energy, or rather job progression. So that's something to take a look at. A couple of the other links that I've shared, this is specific, I guess, for our Wisconsin educators who are on here. At KEEP in particular, we have several ways of supporting educators with energy education. We've been around for almost 30 years here, and really the foundation of the resources we have are our energy lessons. We have them pre-sorted for you into general energy concepts, energy efficiency, and renewable energy lessons, but all the lessons can be seen and searched in a searchable database as well. And I've shared the link to those lessons already in the chat. Of particular interest to folks who are in Wisconsin and are listening to this or watching this live, if you can go to the next slide, Jim, please. Our hands-on energy kits. And Heather introduced herself. She's the person who actually makes these things manifest as physical items in your life. On the left, there is an image of our energy audit kit, which would be, I think, particularly applicable to educators who are doing any kind of building energy modeling. The kit includes 5 infrared thermometers, 5 light meters, 5 watt meters, as well as a fluorophore lens infrared camera that can be attached either you say whether you want an Android or Apple compatible, but can be attached to a smart device. And then you can overlay the infrared image over the visible image, and your students can really get a great look at where heat is being lost or gained in places where it is not desirable to be having that happen. So the link to the kits is there, and if you go to that, you just click on the kit you're most interested in. You can see its availability. For the energy audit kit in particular, it is our most requested kit, and we have them also hosted at locations around the state. So we have one at CISA 10, one in the Brown County, Green Bay area, one down in the Milwaukee area as well, so that the travel time isn't as far, and maybe you can pick up in person. But for educators who you can't pick it up or it's not nearby, KEEP will either cost share or can drop off and deliver at no cost to you using speedy delivery. So it really depends on your budget. If you can afford it, we would love to cost share. If your school district can't, we're happy to pick up the costs. And our program is, I didn't mention this earlier, but KEEP is funded by the utility companies in Wisconsin. And so we're not like doing this out of the kindness of our hearts. Just consider it that your school districts have prepaid for some of our services by paying their utility bills. And second to paying staff salary and benefits, utility bills are the second highest cost to school districts. So if you as an educator can really demonstrate that you are helping control that really large budget item through your curriculum, I mean, that is such a great tie-in as well. And next slide, please, Jim. The final thing that I wanted to share in here is and Heather, if you could drop the link, because I don't have it on my screen. We have a competition that we run twice a year, and we do this in collaboration with Focus on Energy, which is the statewide energy efficiency program. And this is really fantastic. And Joe may have participated. I can't quite remember. But for this, we have cohorts of 5 to 6 schools, and we can take up to 20 schools for each round of competition. So up to 40 schools each year. And in our partnership with Focus on Energy and Resource Central, one of the really nice features is your school building actually will get an electricity data logger, an e-gauge that is installed behind the electric meter. So in real time, you, your students, your administrators, facilities, anybody who has the URL to the e-gauge can see how a building is using electricity. And it's just really, really awesome to have that. And that's just one part of it. We also, one of our colleagues will come in with a Focus on Energy advisor, and your school is given 4 of the energy audit tools that I showed you in the energy audit kit. You get to keep those. Your students learn how to do an energy audit in your building with the Focus on Energy advisor and the facilities person in your district. And we walk around, and students like this because they get to really go behind the scenes and see the mechanicals of the building, see how much energy the kitchens of schools are using, and begin to connect that to where the energy peaks and troughs are during a daily schedule, as well as over a weekly schedule, and then over the period of a year, and starting to see some of those patterns and how a commercial space like a school building uses energy compared to how maybe their residents could use that. So if you are in Wisconsin, I strongly encourage you to do this. Your school building keeps the e-gauge, and you have this data forever, and then it matches up really well. And as you're doing the modeling of buildings with your students, you have real data from your buildings that you can not just see, but can download as CSV files, and then have them manipulate the data depending on what level of learning they're at and what their data literacy is. So I think that might be, yes, I think that's all I have to say, but thanks, Joe. I see he said in the chat, please participate. It's awesome. I'm wondering, before I get silent again, if there are any questions, or if you would like to look more deeply at any of the KEEP resources.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in here really quick. Just to follow up on that thing I put in the chat. That is certainly one of the most untapped resources. Looking into that e-gauge, and my school used that a lot to make really educated decisions about when we were going to start our ovens for lunch, looking at peak times and this and that. So if you have any interest in that, please look into that. That was a huge untapped resource that really made a difference in my school. My school saved about $10,000 a year by simply lowering our hallway light usage. And so we were able to do that through that program.
And if we have a moment, I'll actually just share my screen to show what the e-gauge data looks like, that somebody would be able to, just so you have an idea of how maybe this ties into what you might be doing. So this is from Parkview High School that participated. This is just looking at it over the period of one day. If we take a look at week's usage, it's loading. Here it is. We see that the peaks and troughs, my guess is that, yep, I was going to say this looks like it's in the weekend times here, but there's definitely some usage that was going on Saturday, definitely higher than Sunday. We'll look at a month. And what's really nice is we're seeing the usage in real time as well. So these are data that you can have your students look at, and if your school has solar, that also can be integrated into the e-gauge, and those other curves are then in here, and students can look at the difference between the generation and the consumption as well.
And so another great partnership and some really great resources to be able to use. I won't dwell on them more right now, but please know that they're available. And hopefully we can see them get more use. Wouldn't students want to know about their building, about the building that they are in? And so I want to offer just a possible approach to how you might go about that, with a word of caution in that Sketchbox is really a tool that is built for making decisions about changes that you might make to a building. I don't think its real intent is to try to model exactly an existing building and predict exactly what the energy use will be. It's a much better tool for making predictions about changes than it is necessarily about trying to model exactly a specific building. With that being said, you can still do quite well pretty quickly. And so here are my suggestions. So I'm going to actually switch over to Google Earth just for a moment. And I'll share my screen so you can see what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a search for an address of one of the buildings in the college system that I'm affiliated with, Madison College in Madison, Wisconsin. And we'll take a look at that area. And so what I'll focus in on, let me reset this to north. Okay, so right next to our main campus, I'll zoom in hopefully a lot so that you can see, is our health education building. And there are a few other programs in this building as well. And so if this was the building that I wanted to model with students and I knew nothing about this building, one way that I might go about getting started is just like this. I could open in Google Earth this image, this location. There's a measuring tool in Google Earth. It's actually a little icon of a ruler that I can choose from the top. And I can begin to measure the dimensions of the building. So this building really looks like sort of two rectangles that are near each other. And so I could, for example, measure the width of this rectangular part of the building, find it's about 54 meters. I could measure the other dimensions. I could use that to determine the area of this building. Once I have the area of this building, and I could ask my students to do this in a number of parts to break it into shapes that they can easily model as rectangles, find the area. Right now, without changing the settings in Google Earth, what we'll have is an area that is in square meters. So I could ask my students to do some conversions to square feet, or you can actually reset Google Earth to work in other units. Once I have the area of the building, I'll need to know how many floors it is to understand the entire square foot area of the enclosed building. And then what you can also do, let me turn off the ruler for a second. I can go to a street view, for example, or more likely with your students, you're just actually going to walk out in front of the building and say, well, okay, this building appears to be 3 stories, for example. And so once I know the square footage of the satellite view footprint of the building, I can start to understand how many square feet of actual classroom space are available here. And that's really important for occupancy and lighting and other sorts of things like that. So for your actual building, maybe you don't know the square footage, but you can go ahead and walk your way through around the building outside and make some decisions there. You can also take a look at the facades of the building, and you can see this building right here, for example, a tremendous amount of glass over on the north side of the building. And so you can use that when you start working with window percentages. So I'm going to switch back to Sketchbox now and just do a brief build of this, actually a related building. Okay, so now you're taking a look at the building that I am in at this moment. This is our Madison College South Campus, and we'll use this building a little bit later for a number of reasons. So if you notice, this building actually has a large solar array over part of the roof. This building also has an overhang, which is actually right here on the south face of the building. There's also an overhang on the north face of the building. And you can get a sense of the fact that this would take a little bit for students to model as a number of separate rectangles, but you can find the area of this building and then take this 3-story building and build a model in Sketchbox. So I'll switch over to my Sketchbox model that I built a little bit earlier this morning. Okay, so now you're taking a look at my Sketchbox screen. And what you'll notice, hopefully you can see here in the turnable model of this building, I actually have two separate buildings here that I've put together. And so I'm not going to say a lot about this. It's just valuable to know that you can do this. And the reason I've done that is because this building has a basement floor that's smaller than the rest of the building. And so I'm illustrating this only as a way to show that you can start to model even more complicated building shapes. Sketchbox is a quick tool that's made for just modeling rectangular buildings, but you can take several rectangles and put them near each other. And so, for example, what I can do is place this building adjacent to another. So I can take two buildings. If you have a building that has two separate floor heights, for example, a small part next to a large part, you can start to model more complicated buildings. What else have I done in this model? I have also noticed that the building I'm in is relatively new, but it was completed in 2018. It was probably not built to a 2018 energy code. And so I can change the energy code to be one that would have been in use at an earlier time. In the design tab, I've chosen again a school and university building. You'll notice here that the two separate parts of the building that I just demonstrated are actually separate pieces of this model, and they each have their own square footage. They each have their own characteristics. And then I've given each of them their own square footage, but I've also made some interesting changes to the window to wall ratio. And so in this part of the building right here, most of this part of the building is actually underground. So I've taken all of the windows away. It doesn't have windows other than some windows that are on the east side of the building. In the other half of the building, there's a lot of glass, in some cases over 50% window area. And so I can make customized changes to different parts of this building. The above ground parts of this building are also brick. And so I've changed the construction material from a metal building or metal frame building to what's called a mass building. And so I've made all of those changes. And so you can start to approximate many different types of buildings. And the first step really, some of the most important steps are determining what is the construction, what is the window area, what are the dimensions and the number of floors in the building. And that really helps build all the other things that we need to build. I'm going to come back to this building model a little bit later. But before we do that, we're going to actually hear from Joe briefly about a building that he decided to do a model of, a very different building, some considerations that he had, and then we're going to take a short break. So we'll head first over to Joe. Joe, you decided to model a very different building than the school building that I did. And you should be able to share your screen.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Sorry about that. I was just making sure that I had this up. Okay. So I'm going to share kind of something that I did in my classroom. And so let me go ahead and pull the screen sharing from Jim over to me. And then I will. All right. I'm hoping everybody can see this. So this is kind of what I do in my classroom, talking about building modeling and getting students to think about different aspects of that and how that relates to a lot of things that happen in their lives. So I've chosen a retail mall. And one of the questions I kind of start with students is I ask why questions or what questions. And so here is a why question. Have you ever wondered why the retail model is failing across the United States? So this is more of a high school level question, perhaps. Maybe middle schoolers don't understand this quite as well yet. But we know that things are moving away from the quote unquote brick and mortar store and have traditionally moved to more of an online platform now. So why are there so many online options? And what I really love about Sketchbox is how it really kind of almost forces a discussion. There's so many different things to consider and so many different things you can change that students really get talking about this, which is kind of what you want in your classroom. So why are there so many online options instead of the traditional brick and mortar store? And why are all these retail malls either being torn down, closing up, whatever the case is? So questions for students: is it because there's more options online? Is it easier or cheaper to ship than it is to a customer than it is to have them come in? And you really have less employees if you have an online setting, or perhaps, you know, what is the quintessential reason that these online stores have taken over our brick and mortar retail segment? So again, with Sketchbox, it really allows me as a teacher and students to discover an answer by their own changes in their own modeling. So let's look at what it costs to operate a brick and mortar retail space, and we can do that using Sketchbox. Now, I live in Eau Claire and I teach just south of Eau Claire, and I am still, I guess, lucky enough to have a mall that operates in a fairly competitive market here in Eau Claire. So I have the Oakwood Mall, and here I've put the address down on that. So I have the Oakwood Mall located in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And now I'm going to go take a look at what it costs to maybe operate a mall like this from an energy standpoint as compared to maybe an online store. So as Jim did with his model, I went to Google Earth, and you can see Oakwood Mall is a very large place, an unbelievable amount of square footage. So I just took what they call one corner store or one anchor store in the mall, and I have that highlighted with a red box here. Now I use Google Earth to measure the area of that. And now we're getting back into those math standards. So I found the area of this one corner store using Google Earth. The area, each side of this square or rectangle is 300 feet. So that gives me 90,000 feet squared. Again, standards, talking about units, talking about numbers, doing calculations. And then using Sketchbox, this is a one floor. There are not multiple floors for this. But in Sketchbox, you don't have to have multiple floors to show a height. You can simply change the height in and of itself and keep that as one floor. So I've changed my height to 30 feet for this. Well, now we've got volume, back to standards, back to calculations. And I end up with 2,700,000 cubic feet. And so just below, I've talked about kind of how that works: area, volume, unit conversion, dimensional analysis. And so as Jim measured, you could leave this in meters and have students do the dimensional analysis to figure out what the square footage is. So I've used that, and you can see the cubic feet of an anchor store, a real life anchor store in the mall in Eau Claire, is enormous. Now, one of the very first things you can do in your project tab is you can have electrical preset. So I've changed my electrical preset to roughly 10.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, where did I get that from? Well, I pulled that off what I pay for my own electric bill just about 2 miles away from this mall. Now there's a conversation to be had is this commercial setting, does it still pay that? And there can be some investigation if they're buying their electricity in bulk, maybe they pay a much lower rate. These are, again, great conversations to have with your students, especially as a shop teacher, if you're talking about general contracting. So there's an electrical preset of 10.8. I changed it to what I actually pay of 12.9 cents per kilowatt hour. I changed my location to Eau Claire. And then, as you can see on here, window ratio. This is a brick building. There are no windows. So I was able to change my window ratio to 0. Now, once I've got that preset in, I've gone over to my scheduling tab, and I can look at the set of schedules that this mall kind of operates on based on what's preloaded in Sketchbox. Keep in mind, I didn't have to input any of these scheduling. That's one of the great things about Sketchbox. There's so many kind of pre-existing sets that are in there. When I just chose the retail mall setting, these schedules are already built in. And it turns out that this is extremely accurate to what my Oakwood Mall does in fact run. So if you look at these different schedulings, now this gets maybe more into a middle school level where you can talk about, does this graphing make sense? If you are an educator, you know how important graphing is, not only for standardized testing and ACT, but just understanding how to take data and put it into a visible format. So you can look at this cooling set point, and this is a great opportunity to ask a student, this cooling set point graph, what is it telling us? Well, now you can discuss x-axis, and you can discuss y-axis, and you can discuss, if you wanted to, a slope. So this cooling set point says that they lower the temperature, probably in the summer, at 9 o'clock in the morning. Why do you do that? Great question for middle schoolers. Well, that's probably when the mall opens. And then at 9 o'clock, they let it heat back up in the summer. Why? Well, that's probably when the mall closes. And if we look at the schedule just below that, it talks about occupancy. If you notice, the cooling set point and the occupancy are essentially inverses of one another. Well, now you're back to mathematical standards or even a science standard, direct versus indirect or inverse relationships. You can see cooling set point and heating set point on the right-hand side there. Now you have a winter where that heat is being applied to the building during the opening process. Ventilation, lighting, domestic hot water use. A really great opportunity for students to take data in a number set and see it in a graphing format, which I think graphing is something traditionally I see in my classroom, students struggling to make sense of. When a student changes different parameters within this Sketchbox, they're able to see that graph change as well. So I wanted to highlight that and talk about, just how important I found that scheduling to be. And you can change those different setting points in Sketchbox as well. Okay, now probably a little bit more advanced, but at the high school level or even at a business or a commercial level, having a discussion with your employees. I know we had someone in here who talked about working for the state of Minnesota and talking about buildings and kind of discussing efficiency. Okay, so when I'm talking with my high school students, after they're done and they've analyzed everything and they've run their results, I can ask really great questions like, what is the single biggest cost for your building? What's the most expensive month to operate? What is one architectural adjustment, whether that's lighting, whether that's insulation value, whether that's decreasing the size, you could make to save the most money? What changes would you see if this mall was located in Dallas, Texas? We saw that with Jim's example earlier, moving a building from Chicago to LA. And so from each one of these here, you can now talk about percentages of a whole. What percent does this make up? Now you're really deep into math standards. Now you're talking about some things that can be applied to chemistry and physics. And so what we see here is just so much integrated data and detailed data that it's just so easy to have great, really authentic conversations with students, with other staff members, and things like that. So I did want to mention that. And then going further here, I'm going to mention the lessons that are available from Slipstream. So if you kind of want to see what some of these lessons look like that are out there right now, there are, I believe, almost 6 lessons that have been fully built that you could look into. Lesson 1 with intro to modeling these buildings, 2 talking about energy codes and measure sets, building schedules in lesson 3, and then carbon emissions, as Jim kind of mentioned, in lesson 4. And so out on the Wise Learn website, there are some lessons that have been made by other teachers around the state. Dave made a lesson about energy costs of expansion. So a lot of schools have talked about, hey, we have an increasing enrollment. We need to expand. What's this going to cost us? Not just the building itself, but the long-term cost with energy. I made a lesson talking about energy modeling and climate change. There is a wonderful website out there that is kept up to date by the University of Maryland, and it talks about what climate is predicted to be in the next 30 to 60 years. You can look on that website, partner that with partner that with your Sketchbox inputs, and you can get a lot of different data about, hey, if I have this mall in Eau Claire, Wisconsin right now, and I look on the University of Maryland's website and find out what Eau Claire's temperature and climate is predicted to be like in 60 years, what will buildings cost to operate in 60 years from now? And so there's a lot of great opportunities to put other programs kind of tied in with what you have. Jim's going to talk about some other really great programs that exist coming up for that as well. And then I will, I believe, kind of just finish up here a little bit. One of the things as an educator, or I think anybody that uses a new system, is there's a lot to be nervous about, right? How much time is this going to take me to, get a handle on? What if my students have questions that I can't answer? Well, Sketchbox offers a really robust YouTube channel that has a ton of videos on getting started with Slipstream Sketchbox. Both of those are linked in here. You'll note it says no duplicate of slide 31. We had a duplicate slide in here that we just shifted down. So that's why that's in there. But there's a whole YouTube channel kind of dedicated to using Sketchbox. I have personally used that myself. Super intuitive, super easy to use. And the truth is that if you just don't have time in your classroom to go through that yourself, that can be a whole class in and of itself. Hey, we're going to learn this together. I always say that fear is a mile long, but only an inch deep. So if something looks intimidating, I'm telling you with this program, as soon as you get into it and it just becomes so easy. You're going to say, well, I don't know how all this works. You play around for 5 minutes, you're going to say, oh, I get this. Now I can see where my data comes from. And integrating that into lesson plans or integrating that into your standards, it's so easy. So what do we have in that YouTube playlist? You've got tutorials. There is a community library in Sun Prairie where there's a 3-part case study on that. So if you're worried about kind of leading your own case study, if you're worried about your own building modeling and you're saying, hey, I don't know if I feel comfortable enough to model my own building in front of students yet, there's a 3-part case study of a community library in Sun Prairie. And then there's the 53-minute Sketchbox webinar from previously, where there is a great host of information. So I know there's a lot of parameters on here, and you can really, with this tool, one of the things that's great about it, and again, using it even at the middle school level, you can make it as complicated as you want to be. If you want to use it as a professional tool, model as a construction engineer or as a commercial contractor, you can certainly do that. If you simply want to have your students get a look at graphing at the middle school level, you can do that with here, just looking at the schedules. So it's really as robust or as simple as you want to make it, which is, in my opinion, one of the real beauties of the program. So with that being said, I am going to have Jim take back over the sharing. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. If you want to put it in the chat, I'd be happy to answer it.
Great, thanks, Joe. Sorry,
Right.
I lost Zoom for just a second. Tamara, go ahead.
It's okay. I was just going to bring to our attention, especially for people who might be watching this later, that we've been having a chat going on, and Sharon had asked a question here, which I need to get back to. Where have I lost it? She asked, is there a resource that lists all the options for items that are changeable within the model with their definitions? And that's been answered, that, Jim was saying it's a good idea and it doesn't exist yet, but I just wanted to put that out there because people won't be able to see the chat later on.
And
that's good.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just add on to that really quick. I think Jim is going to talk about support, but if you ever want to send just an email out to myself, or I guess I'm throwing Jim in here, or Samara, and just say, hey, I'm looking for this feature. Can I do it? A lot of times that's just a really quick, simple email that we can answer back in just a second or two. And so Jim's probably the expert, maybe Samara even more so than me. And so anyway, I just want to kind of reiterate again, it's not often like a whole page of like, oh, you got to do this and then that, and then be careful with this. It's usually really intuitive, and one of us could get back to you very quickly.
I'd like to pick up, we were talking about support for Sketchbox, and you start using this and you run into maybe some difficulty or something that you're wondering how you can do that you're not sure how to fit in. I'd like to show you a few ideas about how that works. So in Sketchbox, I'll point it out later when we get back to using Sketchbox again. There actually is a support feature. It is on the very first tab, the project tab that you work with, in the lower left-hand corner. And if you click the support button that's there on the left, what you'll find is a callout box that looks like the callout box that's here on the right. And so the best way to get a response to a question is to use the Unmet Hours external Q&A forum. So this is monitored by a few people from Slipstream. And the nice advantage of this is that other people can see answers to questions that you might ask. So this is actually a nice community forum for using Sketchbox. So click on that top option. It'll give you a place to ask technical questions for something that you're trying to do in Sketchbox, but you're not quite sure how to do it. There is below that a contact support feature. That's not really a technical support feature. That's really another place to get help with an account issue, a login problem, or a question about account login. So that's available in Sketchbox. I'll point out later where that is. Let me jump in and talk about right now integrating renewable energy with a building in Sketchbox. And so I'm going to open a program that's called PVWatts. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I've actually got PVWatts open in the background. This is a program that's provided by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It's a great solar resource tool. And I'm just actually going to jump back a little bit. So what I've done is put the address of the building that I modeled for you before into PVWatts. What PVWatts has done is found weather data that's close to that location within 1.2 miles, it gives me here. And if I go ahead to now look at the system information, it has some default characteristics. So basically, it's adding solar PV to a building. And the default characteristics here are for a 4 kilowatt system and a particular amount of losses and a tilt angle and a direction. And so what I'm going to do is actually in PVWatts call out a mapping function that's similar to what we were looking at for Google Earth. Here's the same rooftop we were looking at before. And what you'll notice on this rooftop is this large solar array that already exists. And so I want to model that. And so in PVWatts, I can measure dimensions as well. This will actually give me an area. I'm just going to click each corner of this PV array. And this tells me the size of the PV array that we could create. So this is telling me I get just a little under 110 kilowatts. And it tells me the area of this array in square meters. So if I close that callout box and say, we don't want a 4 kilowatt system, we want a 110 kilowatt system to model because we already have that. I can add a few other parameters that I know. I know this system is at a tilt angle of about 10. There'd be nothing wrong with leaving the default. I also could tell from that picture that this array is not pointed exactly south. It's a little bit to the west. So I'll change this azimuth angle a little bit. These are all materials that you can find in PVWatts. We don't need to be sophisticated or really change these defaults, but I'm just going to model for exactly the system that I know. And this tells me that this array on the rooftop will produce close to 140,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in a year. So let's put that number in our minds, 140,000 kilowatt hours. And I am going to jump back to our Sketchbox model that we built for that building before. And so as I share that screen with you, what we'll find is that the annual electric consumption, I'll highlight it right here. It's going to be a little bit hard to read. That's about 578,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. And so there's a sizable solar array on that school, but that school that is 3 floors uses enough energy that the solar array is going to offset a significant amount, close to 25% of the electricity used by that building over the course of a year, but not all of it. And from a student perspective, we could go back to look at that rooftop again and say, well, we already have this large solar array. Could we add more? The answer is yes, but we can't add 4 times as much. And so it helps to give students an understanding of the scale of how solar works in a building. By the way, this is a very interesting calculation. I was curious. I modeled my own elementary school, which is just a rectangular building that is 1 story tall. And we can actually pretty easily meet the electric load for that building because the amount of roof area compared to the amount of classroom space is pretty large. And so that's really the easiest way that I would recommend integrating solar into a building. Take a look at the rooftop. Use PVWatts to decide what you could do for your location, have students design a system, and the integration, I think, is really, it's very easy. 2 more interesting features that are really important. So here's our project tab for my school building in Madison, Wisconsin. And in the measures tab, what I can do is say, I'm going to put solar on this building. The problem that I have for this building is that I can't meet all of the solar. I can't meet all of the electric need by using solar because I don't have enough roof space for this building. The building uses too much electricity. And so how would you work on that? And so one of the additional features we've not looked at so far is this tab called the Measures tab. And on that Measures tab, there are a number of icons that could be a little bit confusing. The easiest one is just this stack of blocks right here, which is to add a measure set. So I'm just going to click that as a way to get us started. We're just going to add a pre-formatted standard measure set. And what this does is add a large number of different tools. In a way, this is to a question that Sharon asked before. Here is a sense of some of the things that can be changed in this building. And so you could add better insulation to the roof. You could add better wall insulation. You could seal the building so that there are less air changes per hour. There's less area getting in and out of the building. Here is the glazing U value, or for example, the glazing, the window solar heat gain coefficient that Joe mentioned before. So there are 17 options in total. I'm not going to discuss all of them right now. This is much better if you explore on your own. But the ideal thing about this is that we can run the results for this measure set. And I'm going to let that happen. It's going to take a little bit. You can see it's got quite a few models to run in the background. But while this is running, I'll talk about the advantage of what this is going to do. We're going to be able to look at a data chart that will tell us measure for measure which have the biggest impact. What are the things that we really want to consider? And so here we see the annual energy cost. I'm going to scroll down actually to this table that's in blue right here. This gives us energy cost savings. It tells us if we upgrade every single one of those things to a more efficient building. And these are sort of the best cost-effective measures that Slipstream feels is possible. So we could add enormous amounts of roof insulation, but really what's practical and cost-effective? That's really what these measures are. You can see that the likely gain from these different measures is not the same. This top bar is the roof insulation. We can add better roof insulation, but the energy code requires the roof insulation to already be pretty good. We can add more wall insulation, but that's really the same thing. Air sealing could have a pretty big impact. This bar that is far and away the largest, along with the one below it that is almost as large, those are lighting. And so if energy code, if the building does not have efficient lighting, those are really important places to start. And here actually interior lighting task tuning, this really is just something that Joe mentioned before, changing hallway lights. Your hallway may be lit to an extent that's more than it needs for safety and for code. And if that's true, there may be large energy and cost savings to happen there. And so this is the measures tab. It really is one of the really neat things that we can do here. And so if we come down to the bottom, what we can find is that our proposed building has an electricity consumption that is tremendously less than the building that we started with. In other words, here is a really important notice for students. Our building started at 578,000 kilowatt hours. The solar production is about 140. We can do a lot better than that in terms of avoided electrical generation just by making the building more efficient. And so there are some tremendous lessons here that you can take. Now, it's going to be pretty expensive to make every single one of these changes, but even if we make half of these changes, just prioritizing the most important ones, we'll still be able to make large reductions that reduce the amount of energy, renewable energy that we need to produce to be able to support a fraction of the generation needed by this building. And so those are really kind of the main features that I would like to point out. I'd like to mention also the baseline tab, which we haven't talked about yet very much. This basically gives us a sense to understand what are the default values that are being used for this building. So it gives lots of technical information about the thermal characteristics of the building and the efficiency characteristics of the equipment. And so each of these takes a little bit to understand. And so you don't need to jump in and understand and work with all of these for your students. I think the suggestion really would be to take 4 or 5 of these that we know are going to be impactful and that are easy to understand and explain and to talk with for students, and focus on those. And if students want to explore and do research about some of these others, it's a wonderful thing. But you don't have to understand every single one of these to use this program. Take 4 or 5 and focus on those. And you can see we can do modeling without really ever looking at the baseline tab. And then finally, I won't say much about the schedule tab, but here it is. This is where we make adjustments to the schedule. I have a lesson built that walks students through making changes and adjustments to schedules. And so Joe's showed us some nice graphics of that. I won't dwell on that right now. For the Q&A, we have a number of engineers from Slipstream that are with us. Drew Morrison and Emily Golan are here. And so I think it'll be easiest if participants would like to put questions into the chat, or to unmute yourself and say them out loud. But before we get to that, we'll just take a moment to let Drew and Emily introduce themselves again, if they will. And what they can do for us, I hope, is just say a little bit also about their engineers that use energy modeling. How is it that they happen to come to this career? Just a tiny bit about, what was their career path and how do they use Sketchbox in the work that they do. So Drew, maybe if you're willing to start first, I will yield the floor and we'll go to Emily next. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm Drew Morrison. I'm a senior engineer with Slipstream, and I've been in this industry for about 14 years. And I guess what really drove me to kind of be in this career was a number of things. I've always been sort of interested in math and science, and actually, this is just a small anecdote, but I think what really cemented that interest was kind of a middle school experience where me and some friends participated in the first Lego League, which is, if you're not familiar, or you might be, yeah, I see Jim nodding his head. But it really was a really great experience that students build robots out of Legos and program and design those robots to complete these different tasks. And it's really a good sort of preview of what the engineering experience does. So that was kind of the genesis, partially the genesis of the desire to be an engineer. And then as I moved into high school, I started to learn about and become interested in environmental issues, particularly around energy and sustainability and climate change. And that really shaped the direction in which I wanted my engineering career to go. So that's just a short story of how I got to where I am today.
That's great. Thank you, Drew. Emily, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So I'm Emily Golan, like Drew, I'm an energy engineer here at Slipstream. I've been at Slipstream for about 7 years now. I actually started with the company as an intern in college. I was a mechanical engineering graduate from University of Wisconsin-Madison. I actually, growing up, always wanted to be an architect. But then also, like Drew mentioned, I also really like kind of math and science growing up. And so I decided to go into mechanical engineering. Um, and ended up kind of finding this career. I did an internship in college at a coal plant in Wisconsin, and that kind of just really opened up my eyes to one kind of sustainability challenges, as well as kind of the need for clean energy and reducing energy usage. So then I had found an internship here at Slipstream, and the rest is kind of history. I think it's really cool that you guys are kind of teaching this at a high school, middle school level, because it's something that I kind of really wish I would have been exposed to earlier. And I really enjoyed it as a career path, and I'm glad that you guys are kind of teaching people from a younger age.
Thank you, Emily. That's great background. Thank you. So now it's our participants' turn. Are there things that you're wondering about Sketchbox and things that you would like to do or are thinking about that we haven't seen a way to do so far? You can put those messages into the chat, or you can just turn your microphone on and say them out loud, or any questions about this program for our engineers.
I guess I'm just looking, how do I simplify this to get kids started with it? What are the major, so I don't know if we walk through all of it, but what are the core ones that we should really look at and to get kids the idea and then let them expand further?
Yeah, Drew, are you willing to say something about that? What do you think would be the really most important changes or aspects of a building to have students look at in Sketchbox?
Sure, and I know that even with the sort of simplified and streamlined way that Sketchbox is meant to present kind of an interface to a building energy model, I know that there's still a lot of buttons to push and knobs to turn, and so that can definitely be intimidating. So I would suggest definitely following along with at least previewing some of the lesson plans, because I do think that the best, I've always found that the best way to become familiar with something and learn about it is to learn by doing. Just try some things out and and learn that for yourself. But if you wanted to do a kind of a quick way, I think sort of a quick and very succinct way of sort of engaging students' attention and linking some of the things that they can change about a model to really some consequential energy impacts. I would suggest looking at window to wall ratio, which is the sort of the amount of windows, or as we said, glazing that is on a building. I'd also kind of definitely look at the lighting. And then also maybe even or lighting power, and then also to the extent possible, look at maybe different different types of HVAC systems or and maybe even heating and cooling efficiencies. I know that might be more of an advanced subject and maybe more suitable for high school students, but it's definitely worth looking at if you feel that your students can get a conceptual grasp of it. Emily, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. And I think early on too in the presentation, you kind of just talk about like a good intro is just like size of building and getting an idea for kind of what affects energy and usage in a building because it is really complex and a lot of different systems really do affect it kind of in different magnitudes.
Yeah, Andy, I hope that I represented your question correctly. I agree with, I think it's really nice what Emily and Drew said. And to be honest, as an educator, you could have your students create their account and open Sketchbox and change nothing and just click on the results tab and see what happens. And then you could have them just change one thing that's interesting to them. And just that by itself, I think would help them, start to understand how to model the building. Did I represent your question correctly? Feel free to rephrase it if I didn't quite get it. Oh, sorry, I think you're still muted though.
I just wanted a good way to figure out how to get started. You guys answered everything about, not all buildings are rectangular. You guys figured that, but I'm just kind of curious, and they answered it perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. I would start with a rectangular building that has all the defaults and just change nothing and just run a report and see what happens. And then ask your students to change one thing. The instructions for the first 4 lessons that I've written are very scripted too, though. So they have screenshots of the different tabs in Sketchbox and give students, directions for which numbers to change and when to change things back and that sort of thing. So those will be pretty useful too. And Drew had a good idea in a way. You could follow one of those yourself and see how it feels. Good. Other questions? What's next? Other questions for our engineers?
And this isn't a question, but this is just me putting on my former teacher hat is I would definitely give students 10-15 minutes just after they make an account to noodle around and explore before they dive into a lesson because they're going to want to do that anyhow. So just click around, try things out. And that's all I have to say.
And I'd like to add one thing on to that as well. One of the things I really liked about Sketchbox was that you had so many pinpointing locations, right? So you can choose the state, but you can also choose a lot of different cities within the state. And one of the things that caught my attention right away was that Eau Claire was a city I could specifically choose within Sketchbox, and which was great for us as students because it was so close to where we were. So I think that just changing locations allows students to see how much they can customize it. Hey, I always wanted to live in South Carolina. Well, you can really, I think students, especially at the middle school level, love to see that they can choose very specific places that they maybe always wanted to go or want to be someday.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Sharon, your question.
Hi. So I'm wondering in terms of like say that you did want to say like, okay, this is the building that I want to try to put into the model. And it's not like a school or necessarily an office. Like, how do you decide which building type to use? Is there sort of like some general guidance around that?
Yeah, I can
Sharon, your
maybe.
audio. Oh, sorry. Sharon, your audio cut out just a little bit, so I just want to rephrase the question. I want to rephrase the question just to make sure that we got everything that you said. So you may be trying to model a type of building that doesn't necessarily fit into any of the categories that's included in Sketchbox. Is that correct? And you want to sort of come up
Yes.
with a way of accommodating that.
Yes, like for example, I'm trying to model a lot of like park district buildings, and I'm like it's kind of like a school, it's kind of like a gym, I could just try one, but I don't know how to kind of go about figuring out what the best option would be.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Drew, feel free to jump in at any point if you've got any other items to add. But um, I mean, kind of like you're already saying, it's good to choose one that you think is kind of similar. Typically, what you'd want to kind of think about is general building usage, right? So a school, you're going to have a lot more people, a lot more lighting, where a gym is probably going to have a lot more kind of like cooling, heating. So you kind of want to think about like the operation of a building and what it's most similar to as far as like occupant usage. Um, and then probably also kind of schedule. Uh, Drew, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. To provide a little bit of commentary, Sharon, this is actually an issue that we encounter not infrequently in our practice, and so there is often a certain amount of professional judgment that goes into something like that. But it's also, if you kind of, it may be an opportunity to get students to sort of think through the problem and think about common sense. Think about if you've gone into a community center, um, how much do people use it as a gym, and then maybe if there's classrooms, which one is it closer to, or you've got something like that. Another way to do it in Sketchbox is actually to create two of those shells, and then make one of those shells a gym and the other shell kind of schools or classrooms. Or often, park district buildings might have administrative offices, so you make part of you make a shell for an office. And I think that's actually a great opportunity to maybe also, um, you know, invite students into some of the sort of some of the kind of shoe leather routine calculations where they might, you might go onto Google Maps and or Google Earth and calculate the area of the building that's a gym, or the area of a building that's the classrooms, and maybe, work on some, sort of some math skills around calculating percentages. But the way that if I had a building like that and I needed to sort of to deal with that problem, what I would do is I would perform those kinds of calculations, figure out the percentages of the building that are sort of dedicated to what we call different end uses, and then create an individual shell for each of those end uses in Sketchbox.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. And then I guess in terms of like kind of how you think about those different building types, I think that maybe goes back to kind of my other question about just like a resource of like, what are the things that like in your mind differentiate like an office from a school or something, that might not be obvious to like a layperson who's just like, well, they do both just look like box-shaped buildings. And so some of those pieces I think could be really helpful to have a little bit of reference material.
Thank you, Sharon. Other questions from participants? Not seeing more questions immediately. Drew or Emily, would one of you be willing to share your screen and in Sketchbox just show us, how you set up adjacency and two separate shells working together?
Yeah, I can do that if you want. Give me just a moment. I'm going to set up Sketchbox here. Oh,
okay. And Samara, we'll probably need you actually, Drew hopefully is already a co-host that can share. Thank you. Got it. Great.
Yeah, give me a second here. Okay, there's my share screen.
Yeah.
Okay, does everybody see my browser window? And I've got a kind of Sketchbox window open.
I think we're good now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let's make an example project. And actually, Sharon, let's talk about maybe the question that you had, or something that's related to that, where you have a building that could, conceivably fit under multiple use types, and you want to figure out how to sort of handle that. So I go into my design, let's say that we do have maybe let's call it like a something that I did recently was actually maybe like it's actually a university building that had some classrooms, and then it also had some offices for faculty and graduate students. And so you do have kind of this different, sort of different set of use cases. So we'll start with the offices, and maybe they have, let's say if it's 100,000 square foot building, let's say maybe they have 40,000 square feet of offices and 60,000 square feet of classrooms. So I'm just gonna kind of change this around a little bit. I'm gonna kind of leave everything else here as default for the moment, and then I'm gonna create a new shell. This will be my classrooms. I'll change the building type to, we'll do school/university, and I'll make this 60,000 square feet, and we'll make it, we'll also make it a three-story building. So to kind of answer your question about sort of what can be different between offices and classrooms, I think a lot of that goes to sort of, to be honest, some professional experience or, things like that. To your question, I'm not really aware of any descriptive resource that might have some of those guidelines. There certainly are differences in some of the default categories that make some of this up, and a lot of that is actually driven by building codes. So offices and classrooms often will have different ventilation requirements, things like that. But I do think that trying to parse that question out for yourself can be a great exercise for students in critical thinking, and sort of exploring things, to kind of say, what do you know about an office, and what do you know about a school building that's different? When are offices occupied? Are they occupied on the weekends? Do you come into school on the weekends to do anything? And does that make any sort of difference? So things like that, I think, can really be an opportunity to kind of engender lateral thinking, or create some creativity in what students might do. But if we want to sort of meld these two buildings together, these two parts of a building together, we can do it in a couple ways. So one might be, as I think Jim demonstrated in a little bit, there is sort of a visualization of your building, and you can sort of put them together. There is you can separate them just by right-clicking on a particular surface and adding that, and just using the menu options that are there. So I can attach the offices to different surfaces. I can put the office, sort of the faculty offices on top of the classrooms. However you want to handle that. And there also is the option to do that in the sort of the side menu here, where I can change, where I can sort of do that with the drop-down menus as well. So there's sort of multiple ways to do it, but I think the best one is sort of to use this, kind of the visualization and right-click and do it like that. Let's see, does that help?
Great. Sharon, thank you for that question. And I have some ideas too. I might try to individually send you some resources about energy use intensity, which I think might be relevant to the work that your AmeriCorps volunteers are doing. So I think it's great that you have them working on that, and I'll be curious to learn more about that too. Are there other questions right now for our engineers? We are coming up to the end of our workshop. Other questions that anyone would like to ask of our engineers?
Could I just ask a general question, which is like, if you can hear me still, which is like, where do you see this Sketchbox tool going? I feel like it's pretty new. Like, what are your plans for it? or is it just, or is this kind of like what you had hoped for right here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I can, frankly, I'll let Dave chime in a little bit on this too if he wants, because I think Dave has also done a lot of, kind of considered this question to a major extent. I will say that I don't think 5 years ago we would have foreseen any educational uses for Sketchbox. The genesis of Sketchbox was actually because we were doing a large volume of energy modeling at the time for some of the utility programs that we run. And so we had, this pinch point that we really needed to deal with. And so we started creating basically these templates for our models in DO2 and eQuest, which Jim touched on briefly, to kind of preload some things and simplify geometries. Some of the things that really take up a lot of time when you're creating energy models and trying to speed that along. So this really sort of began as just sort of a tool to streamline our workflows. So it had sort of limited uses at that point, and it's sort of grown from there as we started to identify additional opportunities. I think where we'd like to take this in the future is not only as an educational and training tool, both is in general education and probably in sort of more applied instances. So I would love to see this used in some, in some probably post-secondary 2-year programs or vocational or technical programs to really instill sort of an intuition maybe on the part of certified energy managers or contractors or people who might be going into the trades that are related to buildings and energy. I also hope that this is going to be used much more frequently by architects or other engineering firms that maybe don't specialize in energy modeling and really don't have the bandwidth or the expertise to deal with some of the more, let's say, complicated programs. This really has a use, hopefully, to be used early in the design process where you don't need a lot of detail, but designers are often making consequential decisions without a whole lot of information. And the sort of streamlined, fast process for this is a way to hopefully provide that feedback and give designers good information to act on rather than sort of doing what they've always done before.
Yeah, well said, Drew. Just building off that a little bit is, as Drew said, Sketchbox wasn't initially designed for education. It was really to kind of inform and make our internal processes kind of faster, quicker, because historically energy modeling has been, really expensive and can take a long time to build a model, up to weeks to turn something around, very complicated. So we really developed this tool kind of internally to kind of simplify the energy modeling process. And then as a nonprofit, we thought, let's not just keep this to ourselves. Let's share this with the world, essentially. And so we have this free version that's available for anyone. And as Drew said, we're trying to make it more accessible for architects and engineers that, maybe not could have afforded, a energy modeling tool that currently exists. But then since it is such a simplified tool, we thought there could be an opportunity here to actually use it as a teaching tool for educators to teach students energy modeling in the classroom, not only energy modeling, but different energy efficiency systems and how buildings operate. So I think kind of sky's the limit on where teachers want to take this. We're not in the teaching industry. That's kind of why we're partnering here with Keep and Jim and Joe, who are amazing educators. And it's just super gratifying to see that, they've really enjoy using the tool. Personally, I think there's an opportunity where students could actually work with their educators and their facilities department to build a model of their own school. And hey, here's our school that where we're at. How could we make the school a net zero building? And then perhaps there could be a competition down the road where students are actually competing against other schools and doing a presentation on like this energy model that they built of their school that is now, could go to a net zero building. So yeah, lots of opportunities in the future. Really appreciate that question, Sharon.
And Andy has a question in the chat. He asks, are there any plans for a specific residential version of Sketchbox and getting further into the details of wall or roof assemblies?
We've actually had this. This question come up a couple times where people have been interested in using Sketchbox for modeling small residential buildings. I will say that I think Sketchbox is well suited to modeling multifamily buildings, anywhere kind of from, I would say, 4 stories up. So, probably medium to large size apartment buildings, mid-rise and high-rise. Sketchbox is definitely capable of handling that. And there is a multifamily building type that is built in the Sketchbox. Modeling something like a house or maybe like a duplex building or a 2-unit, 2-3 unit building is a little bit of is kind of a different animal. And so Sketchbox isn't really built or designed to do that. There are other software tools that are out there like Reopt, or I'm trying to think of others at the moment, and right now it's kind of escaping me. But there are other software tools out there that will do that. Currently, we don't have any current plans to create a residential version of Sketchbox, especially since the Do2 engine is really geared towards larger and commercial buildings. That doesn't mean we won't necessarily that we might necessarily feature. The other thing, I guess, Sketchbox isn't getting into the details of things like, cavity, the cavity insulation on the walls, or things, or continuous insulation, or, if you go to an attic roof versus, continuous insulation on a flat roof. It's as I mentioned, as it's intended to be simplified, we're really just getting down into the, kind of boiling that down. And so we usually wind up looking at, if we want to connect that to more details about, things like envelope assemblies or things like that, we usually rely on reference materials or sometimes external calculators as well. But again, we want to get down to sort of just the walls and roof as a whole, to kind of speed up the modeling process.
Thank you for that, Drew. And Emily, thank you. We are reaching the very end of our workshop. Andy, thank you for that question. And I think I would, just for myself, say I'm really glad that everyone was here. Samara has an important slide that will help all of us in the future for workshops like this. She has an evaluation. And so participants that remain here, if you're able to work out a quick evaluation, I'll put a QR code for it. And I think, Samara, did you already add the link to the chat?
I did.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So we have an evaluation for our workshop. We're really grateful that everyone took time to be here today. Thank you very much to Drew and Emily from popping in to do some great work for us here at the end, and to Dave for making all this possible, and to Samara for working the magic of keeping everything moving in our Zoom presentation. I was grateful to present with Joe, and I hope if you have more questions for any of us that you'll stick around. But thank you very much for a great session, and have a great day.